The air in the courtroom felt heavy, thick with tension, as if every breath was laden with the weight of uncertainty. Rabbani sat at the edge of his seat, his hands trembling slightly, gripping the cold with the table in front of him. His heart hammered against his chest, each beat a loud reminder of what was at stake. His 6-year-old daughter, Saba, sat beside him, her tiny fingers curled into his hand, offering silent support. She didn't understand the gravity of the situation, but Rabbani did. The quiet ache in his chest, the gnawing fear that his life as a father was hanging by a thread, threatened to swallow him whole. Across the room, his wife, Sarah, sat with her arms crossed, her face a mask of frustration and disappointment. The distance between them, once filled with shared laughter and late-night talks, had grown insurmountable. In the years since Saba's birth, Rabbani had faltered. He had been a father in name, but not in action. The weight of responsibility had overwhelmed him, and in moments of fear, he'd retreated, leaving Sarah to shoulder the burden alone. Now, Sarah had filed for custody. Her lawyer's words had been sharp, slicing through the air with accusations that struck to the core. Rabbani wasn't fit to be a father. He wasn't stable enough. He wasn't committed enough. Rabbani couldn't argue with the truth. He had failed. But the thought of losing Saba, the one person who made his world feel whole, was more than he could bear. As the judge turned toward him, Rabbani's mind raced, his pulse quickening. He had one chance left to prove he could be the father Saba deserved. But deep inside, a bitter question gnawed at him. Was it already too late? Rabbani had never been the type of person to take life too seriously. Growing up in a small town, he was a free spirit, the one always chasing the next adventure without thinking about the consequences. He didn't mind being the life of the party, making people laugh, and staying up late with friends. He was always the guy who said, "We'll figure out," as if the world would bend his carefree attitude. But that was before he had a family. When Sarah told him she was pregnant with Saba, Rabbani's world shifted. At first, the news had felt surreal, like something out of a dream he couldn't wake up from. They were young, still figuring themselves out, both full of hopes and big plans. Becoming a father wasn't something he had ever truly considered. The responsibility, the weight of it all, settled over him like a blanket he couldn't escape. In the early days of fatherhood, Rabbani found himself frozen by fear. He had read all the parenting books, but nothing seemed to prepare him for the reality of a crying baby in the middle of the night or the overwhelming exhaustion that came with being a new parent. While Sarah dove headfirst into the role of mother, nurturing, organizing, and caring for their daughter with unwavering devotion, Rabbani struggled. He didn't know how to balance the job he had, the need to provide for his family, and his growing feelings of inadequacy. He was there, physically, but emotionally he was distant, unable to find his place in the whirlwind of change. Sarah was patient at first. She understood the pressure he was under, and she tried to encourage him to step up, but as weeks turned into months, her patience began to wear thin. Rabbani was a good person deep down, but when it came to being the kind of father Saba needed, he faltered. His attempts to engage were often half-hearted. He didn't know how to connect with her, how to calm her when she cried, or how to bond with her in the ways Sarah seemed to do so naturally. The guilt he felt only pushed him further away, convincing him that he wasn't cut out for the role. Sarah began to do more, and more. It wasn't that Rabbani didn't love Saba, he did, fiercely, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was never enough. When he tried to help with the dishes or put Saba to bed, it felt like he was walking through a fog, constantly making mistakes, constantly falling short of expectations. As time passed, the unspoken distance between him and Sarah grew. The tension was palpable, and Rabbani could feel it like an invisible wall between them. Sarah became frustrated. The resentment built quietly, like water eroding rock. She had to do everything herself, and Rabbani knew it. But every time he tried to fix things, to step up, it always felt like too little, too late. There had been moments, fleeting, rare moments, when Rabbani had seen the love in Saba's eyes, when she looked up at him with that innocent trust, and he knew deep down that he couldn't lose that. But he was trapped in a cycle of doubt and shame, a cycle that seemed impossible to break. He wasn't the kind of father he had imagined he would be, and every day it became harder to convince himself he could ever be the man his daughter needed. And then came the moment when Sarah finally said it. "I can't do this anymore, Rabbani. I don't think you're ready to be a father." Those words cut deeper than anything. He had always feared this moment, but hearing out loud made it real. And in that instant, he realized just how much he had failed. But Saba was the one thing that kept him from giving up completely. She was still his daughter, and as long as he breathed, he would fight for her. He had to prove to her, and to himself, that he could be the father she deserved. He just didn't know how. The courtroom was eerily quiet as Rabbani sat at the defendant's table, trying to steady his breathing. His heart pounded in his chest, drowning out everything else. He glanced to his left at Sarah, who sat stiffly, her arms crossed tightly. She wouldn't even look at him, and that hurt more than he was prepared for. Her face was a mask of determination. Her lawyer sitting beside her, whispering to her as they prepared their case. The tension between them, palpable in the air, made Rabbani feel more alone than ever. Rabbani's lawyer, Mr. Grayson, was an older man with a calm demeanor, a steady hand in the chaos that swirled around them. He had advised Rabbani to remain silent for most of the proceedings and let the legal arguments play out. The courtroom was a battleground, but Rabbani didn't know if he had the strength to fight. He wasn't sure he even deserved to. The judge, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an air of no-nonsense authority, glanced between the parties. Judge Harrison had heard it all. The cases of broken marriages, bitter divorces, and custody battles. But this case, she could tell, was different. There was a deep emotional undercurrent here, one that neither parent was willing to address openly. But she would need to get to the truth about what was best for Saba. The first to speak was Sarah's attorney, a well-dressed, polished woman with a voice that could cut through glass. She presented her case with practiced ease. "Your Honor," she began, addressing the judge, "we are here today because my client, Sarah Williams, has serious concerns regarding the fitness of the defendant, Rabbani Williams, to continue as an active parent in their daughter's life. Rabbani has shown a consistent inability to take responsibility, whether financially, emotionally, or in his basic duties as a father. This is not just an issue of sporadic behavior, but of a pattern that has persisted for years. Saba deserves stability. She deserves a father who will show up for her every day without fail. That is why my client is requesting full custody, and for visitation rights to be granted to Mr. Williams only under specific, structured circumstances." Rabbani's stomach churned as her words landed like blows. He'd never thought of himself as a failure, not in the traditional sense. Anyway, he had tried, hadn't he? But here, in the sterile, cold courtroom, it was hard to see his actions in any other light. The accusations felt like an avalanche, burying him in shame. The judge nodded, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Grayson," she said, turning her attention to Rabbani's lawyer. "Your rebuttal?" Mr. Grayson rose, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Your Honor, my client acknowledges that he has made mistakes. He has not always been a father that Saba needs, and he understands the concerns of his wife. But he is a man who is willing to learn, to change, to take responsibility for his past. His love for his daughter has never wavered, despite his struggles, and he is committed to becoming the father she deserves." The courtroom was silent for a moment, the weight of Mr. Grayson's words hanging in the air. Rabbani's heart swelled with a mixture of hope and dread. Could he really do this? Could he prove he was worthy of Saba's love and trust? "Your Honor," Mr. Grayson continued, "Rabbani Williams is not perfect, but he is trying. We request that this court grant him shared custody of Saba, with the opportunity for him to demonstrate his commitment to being a better father, under counseling and support. He will do whatever it takes to be there for her." Rabbani couldn't look at Sarah. He was afraid that if he did, he would see the rejection in her eyes, the rejection that had been building for so long. But as Mr. Grayson finished speaking, Rabbani felt a spark of something within him. He could do this. For Saba. The judge sat back in her chair, her gaze flicking between the two parents, weighing their words. But before she could speak, the courtroom door opened and a small, familiar figure stepped into the room. It was Saba. Rabbani's breath caught in his throat. The judge, taken aback, glanced at Sarah, who seemed equally surprised. Saba had been sitting quietly in the back during the proceedings, but now she walked forward, her small hands clenched in front of her. She looked nervous, but there was something resolute in her eyes. Rabbani felt his heart skip a beat. "Your Honor," Saba's voice was soft but clear, "I want to say something." The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Sarah's mouth parted slightly in disbelief, but the judge nodded, gesturing for Saba to speak. Rabbani's eyes welled up as he watched his daughter stand tall in front of the judge, her little figure so brave in that moment. "I love my daddy," she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. "He's always there when I need him. He's not perfect, but he tries. He plays with me when I'm sad, and he takes care of me when I'm sick. He's my daddy, and I want him to be with me. I don't want to live without him." Rabbani felt the ground shift beneath him. Saba's words pierced the air, her simple honesty breaking through the tension in the room. For the first time, Rabbani saw the truth in a new light. His daughter believed in him. And maybe, just maybe, that was all he needed to begin his journey of redemption. Sarah's eyes flickered with something that might have been regret, or perhaps realization. She glanced at Rabbani, and for a fleeting moment, their eyes met. It was as if time stopped, and all the years of pain, frustration, and missed opportunities faded into the background. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "I believe we've heard enough for today. I will take everything into consideration before making a decision." But for Rabbani, it didn't matter what the judge would say. In that moment, he knew he had already won, because his daughter had spoken, and that was all that mattered. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as Saba walked back to her seat beside Rabbani. He could hardly believe what had just happened. His heart still raced in his chest, a cocktail of emotions that he couldn't quite process. His daughter had spoken. She had spoken for him, and in a way, that made everything else feel secondary. The judge, having heard the unexpected testimony, motioned for a brief recess. Sarah, still stunned, turned her gaze toward Saba and then to Rabbani. There was something new in her expression, something softening, a crack in the walls that had been so carefully built up over the years. Rabbani couldn't help but watch her. He knew she had to be conflicted. For so long, Sarah had been the one doing everything, the one taking care of Saba, the one holding everything together. He had failed her, and they both knew it. But the weight of Saba's words, the pure honesty in her small voice, seemed to cut through the years of resentment, like a light breaking through a thick fog. As the courtroom emptied for the recess, Sarah's lawyer approached her briefly, whispering in her ear. She nodded but didn't seem to register his words. Rabbani could see the wheels turning in Sarah's mind. She glanced at him once, her eyes lingering longer than usual, before quickly looking away. Rabbani felt a brief flicker of something in that look, a glimpse of vulnerability. It was almost as if she was seeing him for the first time in a long while. The man who was still her husband, the man who had fathered their child. Saba tugged at Rabbani's sleeve, pulling him out of his thoughts. "Daddy, is everything going to be okay now?" Her voice was small, fragile, and it broke him. She was so innocent, so sure in that moment that her words had fixed everything. And yet, he knew how fragile everything was. "I hope so, sweetheart," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "I really hope so." The recess stretched on for what felt like hours. Rabbani's mind raced with what Saba had said. "He's always there when I need him." Was that the truth? He had been there for her in moments that mattered, but had he been enough? Had he been the father Saba needed all along? Or was he still just playing catch-up, trying to fix what was already broken? When the proceedings resumed, Rabbani felt a strange calmness wash over him. He was no longer the man sitting at the edge of his seat, paralyzed by fear. No, he was a father. And if he had to fight for his daughter, then he would. The judge returned to bench and called everyone to attention. Her gaze lingered on Saba for a moment before turning to both parents. "Ms. Williams," the judge began, her voice measured but firm. "I've listened to your arguments, and I've heard from your daughter. While custody cases are never simple, this has brought a new layer to consider. But we must address the bigger picture here. The future of your daughter, Saba." Sarah sat up straighter, her eyes now locked on the judge, her lips pressed tightly together. Rabbani couldn't bring himself to look at her just yet. He didn't want to see her face, didn't want to see the disappointment that still lingered there. Instead, he turned his attention to Saba, watching her as she sat beside him. Small and fragile, but somehow stronger than any of them. She had spoken for him. Now, it was his turn to speak for her. "I've made mistakes," Rabbani said, his voice stronger than he expected, rising with a sense of newfound determination. "But I will not stop trying. I will be the father she deserves. I'll do whatever it takes." The words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Rabbani believed them. The judge nodded slowly. "This is a turning point, Mr. Williams. For both you and your daughter, it's up to you now to show that you can be the father she needs. The court will review all factors, but make no mistake, your actions from here on out will speak louder than words." As the judge's gavel came down, Rabbani felt a weight lift from his chest. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but Saba's voice had sparked something in him. Something he couldn't ignore anymore. He had failed in the past, but that didn't mean he had to stay down. The fight for his daughter wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in every moment moving forward, in every small gesture, every step toward being the man Saba believed he could be. And with Saba by his side, he was ready to fight like never before. The days after the court hearing felt like a blur. Rabbani couldn't remember the exact moment when everything started to shift, but it was as if the entire world had tilted slightly, giving him a clearer view of what truly mattered. The judge's ruling was still pending, but the weight of that moment Saba speaking up for him, trusting him, had changed everything. It had awakened something deep inside him that he didn't know he had. In the weeks following the trial, Rabbani made small but significant changes. He began attending parenting classes, something he had once brushed off as unnecessary. He didn't just show up, he participated, eager to learn. He hired a therapist to work through his past fears and insecurities, the things that had kept him distant and afraid to truly step into his role as a father. Saba, who had always been the brightest light in his life, became the focus of everything he did. Each day, he worked to prove to himself that he was capable of being the father she needed, the father she deserved. He started taking Saba to school every morning, making sure she was always on time, something Sarah had always managed on her own. He picked her up from school, took her to the park, and stayed for dinner every night, even when work or other distractions tempted him to pull away. Every day, Rabbani showed up, and for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid to be the man in his daughter's life. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever was. But the cracks in his marriage with Sarah, the resentment that had been festering for so long, began to slowly heal. They started talking again, really talking. They both acknowledged their faults and fears, and while they didn't have all the answers, they were taking steps toward a future where they could co-parent together. It wasn't easy, but Saba's courage had lit a path for them to walk together, even if it was one small step at a time. The final ruling came a few weeks later. The judge awarded shared custody. Rabbani was overwhelmed with relief, but he knew that it wasn't the end. The real work, the lifelong work of being the father his daughter deserved, had only just begun. And in that moment, as he looked at Saba playing the yard, her laughter echoing through the air, Rabbani realized that he was finally home.